to A Beginner's Guide to Observing. My name is Charles Barclay and I'm the director here at the Blackett Observatory situated on the Marlborough College playing fields. Getting going with astronomical observation can seem really daunting, partly because of the huge range of kit available and of course the potential to have to pay lots of money. But I'm going to try and cover some of the main techniques involved and also introduce you to some of the kit that you perhaps should avoid and some of which might be a better use for your observations. So following this, I hope that you're going to be able to get out there and observe under a clear and most importantly, a dark night sky. First questions you need to ask when you're trying to set up an observing night is where and when to observe. Okay, first the where. You need to choose a dark site away from light pollution. Now, you may think that the moon is a good object to have in the sky, but you should avoid moonlit nights unless you want to look at the moon. Okay, so choose a dark night. The next thing is when are you going to observe? Okay, many people will go out at night, but in fact, it's probably best to go out at sunset. As the sun goes below the horizon and twilight sets in, the stars come out in order of brightness and you can actually learn them. And then you can get yourself set up, if you've got kit there, when it's actually light. Obviously the summer months is going to stay light much later, so it's very important to know the time of sunset and the onset of what's called astronomical twilight and pure darkness, which follows several hours later, but these are all things that you can prepare for in advance. So once you've got your where and your when, then it's probably a case of looking at the weather and making sure that you've got ideally a dry and cold night. And this brings me on to perhaps one of the great things about observing, and that is you've got to be wrapped up warmly. So big furry hat, funny hat, Wellingtons perhaps, or thick socks and boots, many layers. Don't be afraid of looking a little bit like a Michelin man. That's going to keep you warm and you're going to be able to stay out for several hours doing your astronomical observations. So with those in mind, now we can start to look at some of the kit that you might want to use. You do not need expensive kit, telescopes, even binoculars, to start your astronomical observations. In fact, in the astronomical community, we sometimes don't measure telescopes by their size or their price, but actually how quickly they go back in their box and up in the attic. So you have available to you one key instrument, and that's your own eye. However, your eye is not normally adapted to low light conditions. So one of the first things to do, perhaps one of the most important things to do, is to get your eye what's called dark adapted. Your pupil in the center of the eye has to dilate or expand, and to do this you need to be in the dark for maybe 10 to 20 minutes. Once dark adapted, you must maintain this state. You'll be able to see almost 100 times better, but any white light, so a mobile phone or a white torch, and that will destroy the condition. So everything we do in astronomy will work in red light, and a red head torch is ideal because you put that on your head and you have your hands free to actually operate instruments or to do drawings or whatever is necessary. But beyond being warm, the most important thing to do before you observe is to get your eyes adapted to the dark. Of course, your eye is limited. You're going to want to buy some kind of astronomical instrument to help your nighttime viewing. And the best place to start, undoubtedly, is a really good pair of binoculars. However, binoculars do have a disadvantage, and that is they're very hard to hold steady. The other thing is that when you found something of interest, you can't pass it on to someone else. So the key is to buy a pair of binoculars that has a fitting or can be attached to a tripod. So buy a nice steady tripod and attach your binoculars, and that will solve the problem. A setup like this will cost you around £100, perhaps 70 for the binoculars and 30 for the tripod, but often these items can be got on sale. So all binoculars come with two numbers associated with them. The first number is actually their magnification. The benefit of binoculars is that they allow you to see a very wide area of the sky, but the bigger that first number, then the smaller the area you see and the harder it is to find objects. In this case, these binoculars are called 10 times 50. These are typically used for astronomical observations. So 10 times magnification, and 10 times, or 10 by 50, the 50 means the number of millimeters across the aperture or the lens, the size of the eye. So in fact, you stretch your budget to buy the biggest eye because that lets in more light. So if your budget allows, you might think perhaps you want to move to a telescope. Here, instead of 5 millimeters, we have a 10 millimeter eye, or 4 inches, and this would be known as a 4-inch telescope. This type of telescope is called a refractor. That's because it has a lens to let in the light at this end. Now, when you buy a telescope like this, actually it's important to notice that sometimes they sell the telescope with an eyepiece of very high magnification, and also it can be lower quality. So one of the things you can do if you have a telescope like this and you want to improve it is to actually buy a much higher quality eyepiece. This setup here will cost you around £200. Actually, it just might be that you're better off spending £200 on a better pair of binoculars. Telescopes are difficult to set up and they're not as versatile as binoculars. So think carefully if this is in your sort of budget range. Of course, if your budget extends further, then you might start paying for telescopes like this one, which has electronics as well. This type of setup here will cost you probably about £500. You'll see a very different type of telescope, and this is the other classic type. This is basically a reflecting telescope. It has a mirror at its end. It's therefore generally shorter, but you can see it has a nice big aperture, rather the same as that last one, around 10 centimeters or 4-inch aperture. Before we go bigger, you will notice that all the ones we've looked at so far are getting bigger and bigger and sturdier tripods. It's very important to have a stable tripod, not only to support the weight of the telescope, but also to give you a really stable view. So if your budget is £1,000 plus, you'll start to afford really big aperture telescopes. This is an 8-inch telescope. It's again a reflector, a slightly different type to the last one, with a mirror down at the bottom. And for this sort of price range, you're going to need to have some kind of computer drive. So these will come with perhaps a computer stored system so that you can actually go and find objects, or else, once you get to know where they are, you can type in coordinates. But these will have a drive to counteract the rotation of the Earth so that when you found an object, you'll stay on target. So at this sort of price range, you're going to begin to do some serious astronomy. It's not necessary, but certainly it's something to aspire to. So let's have a little play around, and you'll see it moves very easily from one place to another. Whatever kit you've purchased, you must make sure that you know how the kit works. And really important, get it set up, check it over in daylight. You don't want to be fiddling around in the dark or in red light. So test it out before you're actually going to use it. However much money you've spent, however, there is no substitute for actually knowing your way around the night sky, and most importantly, preparing for any session of observation that you're going to make. So you've decided what equipment you're going to use to observe. Now you need to find out when is the best time for you to observe, where to look in the sky, and particularly what is a realistic target for you to be observing with the equipment that you've got. There are numerous apps and websites out there to help you locate objects in the sky, to actually tell you about the objects themselves, and even you can hold them up and find out which objects you're looking at. However, please remember that if you're observing at night and using these apps, they must have a night button which will turn the screen red and protect your dark vision. Apart from apps, there are numerous magazines, and these will not only have adverts for more equipment that you can buy, but also have great guides for the sky that is available for you to see at night. And also sometimes they have tips on how to draw these objects and how to observe. So two of those might be Sky at Night and Astronomy Now. If you are using binoculars and telescopes, one book I can really recommend is Turn Left at Orion. This is a great book for actually giving an idea of how difficult it is to find objects, what sort of objects you can find with your telescope, and particularly what you can expect to see. don't expect those Hubble images full of colour. So galaxies are known as grey fuzzies, not without reason. So do your preparation. The amount of preparation you do is never going to be wasted. Get to know what you're going to try and do in your observing session before it gets dark, and then fingers crossed the weather will hold, the sky will be dark, and you can have a really successful astronomical observation. So with planning, preparation and probably a good deal of patience, this is just the beginning, and I hope that this video has provided with a few tips to enable you to go out and enjoy the wonders of the night sky.